When I was a kid, Ben Crafter's step-by-step manga was one of my very first art books. I even remember my aunt taking me to Pearl Paint to gather the supplies suggested in the book because I thought they were required. Over the years, I've collected quite a few how to draw books because I thought that's how you were supposed to do it. Step 1, draw the circle for the head. Step 2, draw the rest of the head. Sometime later, I don't remember when, and I can't seem to find it now, How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way stumbled into my possession, and while I didn't really look at it that much when I was younger, over the years I kept going back to it, and eventually it changed my whole outlook on not just art books, but how to learn. The how-to in the title wasn't like what I was used to. There's no step-by-step instructions in this book, just terminology, technique building, and overall breakdowns on why Marvel artists do the things that they do. It teaches you how to see artwork in a way those how-tos just didn't. I suppose I say all of that to say, this inspired me to do an art exploration video. And it's featuring Zenitsu as the guinea pig. Yay! Marvel has a lot of artists, and if you give 1,000 of them the task to draw a chair, you'll get back 1,000 chairs. I haven't read many American comics. Getting into American comics is a Herculean task all on its own, but that's for another day. But whenever I sifted through my dad's 10,000 plus collection, I came to realize there's no one style of Marvel. And it's changed so much over the years, but when I think of Marvel, I think of the artworks of John Buscema, Steve Ditko, and Jack Kirby. I took a handful of old school Marvel comic covers and pages for reference. Very good practice if you're trying to study a style. First thing I took note of was the face, especially the eyes. I've seen some pretty intricate drawings of eyes on the internet, but here it's just a simple line and a dot. 2 lines at most. Same with the nose, 2 arches for the nostrils and 1 line for the bridge. Facial features here are very minimal, but it's just enough to push the rest of the body's details forward. And that's where the crux of the Marvel look lies, the heroic, dynamic figure. You know, the opposite of Zenitsu. What am I even looking at? While I was drawing him, I knew I needed to push that heroicness. There needed to be a strength in his jaw like the Marvel characters, and I was also debating on pushing out his cheekbones, but he looked too mature with them, so that was a no-go. But it also made drawing his face easier. And while against Zenitsu's character, a timid pose he could not have. Marvel men are built to save anyone at a moment's notice, and so will the blonde mop. That feeling of action isn't just in the pose either, it's in the way they ink too. The bold, confident lines that go from thin to thick and back to thin that draw your eyes to the most important parts of the character, like muscles and the giant black spots that signify shadow. But that just makes the character feel bolder. I didn't want to give Zenitsu any bulging muscles that aren't seen in his default setup, so that boldness is elevated by the inked shadows. This Marvel Zenitsu is kind of a mix of all the references I pulled from, but there was a very big influence of Buscema throughout. And I don't think I did a very good job doing it, but I tried at some point to follow the inking done on some of Jack Kirby's covers, which after some research I discovered were done by the artist Mike Royer, who consequently worked at Disney drawing Winnie the Pooh and Friends. And what a convenient way to segue to the Disney way. Where Marvel plays with dynamic line weight and bold, harsh inking, Disney does not. And what a contrast these two styles turned out to be, even more so than I thought originally. Glenn Keane, Mark Henn, and Andy Gaskell made up my Disney childhood. Tarzan and Aladdin are among my favorite classic Disney movies, and The Lion King and Mulan are in a constant, permanent battle for the spot of my favorite Disney movie ever. The Disney of today doesn't know what it wants to be, but the Disney I grew up with was bursting with life and expression, all compacted into thin lines. I did the same reference collecting as I did with the comics. I often collect references whenever I'm drawing, even if I'm drawing in my own style. With this one, I knew I could show his timid side more since Disney is so good at conveying emotion. I knew his scary ass would fit right in. Now, when you break these characters down, strip them of their colors and their backgrounds, these characters, like I mentioned, are just thin, clean lines. And that should have made the art style the easiest to do, but this was the hardest for me to get right. I'm used to inking loosely and being pretty liberal with my line weight. And even when that wasn't always the case, Even my waitlist lines had some imperfections to them because I thought that just added to the charm. Disney's lines are so neat and precise that I felt like I spent most of the time on this Zenitsu than any of the others. I didn't, but going over the lines and making sure they were at least somewhat uniform felt pretty tedious. I guess this is how the old Disney animators used to feel. Actually, I spent most of my time on my own style than anything else, even though it didn't feel like that at all. The best way I can describe the way I draw is East meets West. The eastern side comes from my consumption of anime and Japanese video games. The wackiness and gag type expressions that come from these things is an art I feel like is lost on American media now. While the western side of my art is influenced by the realistic proportions and expressive inking found in comics both old and new. A couple years back, I started to push my inking more like Jorge Jimenez and a lot of others. Messing around with textures and line weights and black shadows became really fun, and that was no different here. But I'm still learning when to pull back on the black shadows and use color for the actual shadows. The symmetry tool here helped me cut my work time in half, but I did need to warm up a bit because I was focusing on drawing differently for a whole week. While the first drawing was channeling some fake comic book hero bravado, and the second one leaned into his scary side, I wanted this version to portray Zenitsu's serious side and show how powerful he can be. Thicker lines on the outside of the form add boldness, like I did with the Marvel way, and thinner lines on the inside draw your view inward. And I used tiny strokes to make organic textures like how I did for Zenitsu's hands to show they're calloused. Drawing his triangle patterns was fun here too. Clip Studio Paint, the software that I'm using and the software that I exclusively use, has this border effect when you turn it on, anything in the layer gets an outline, so the pattern was pretty easy. All I had to do was draw the triangle and the black outline would appear automatically. And I didn't go into detail about this particular part because I just didn't pay attention to it in the other parts. But it was only when I was getting ready to color that the triangles and a few other details stuck out to me. Remember when I said I realized something about Zenitsu's design in the other styles? Well, it happened when I was coloring the Disney way. Coloring like Disney is very simple. It's just flat colors with colored lines to enhance the flats. My guess is to further push that illusion of life. Rarely would you see shading in classic Disney movies, and that makes complete sense because of how complex the animation is. And this is the part where it dawned on me that a character like Zenitsu, or any Demon Slayer character for that matter, would be a terrible design for a studio like Disney. Frame-by-frame animation is a very meticulous process, even now with the technology we have today because you are drawing movement by hand. The frame rate for many animated projects you see today, whether it be Western or Eastern, is 24 frames per second with 12 drawings for each second, meaning each drawing is held for 2 frames to cut time and to save money because if you're going to be working on a 20-minute show, you're going to need all the resources you can get. This is also called working on twos. Disney's animation, the bedrock for frame by frame as we know it today, worked on ones. I'll give you 24 frames to figure out what that meant. Now imagine drawing Zenitsu with all his triangles and all his orange-yellow hair and orange-yellow kimono and orange-yellow... What are these things called? Point is, if a design like Zenitsu were actually pitched back then, part of me thinks the workers would commit seppuku. It also makes it even more impressive that characters like this get animated today on a weekly basis. Please thank your neighborhood animators for sacrificing their life points. The fade-out orange accents were really pushing it, and I'm almost positive the triangles would have been scrapped, but I couldn't exactly omit it either. Instead of a gradient effect, I just made a solid block of orange, and since I already did the triangles, I figured I might as well add some shading. Make him even more tedious to draw 1,000 times over and over, for animators and comic artists. I first thought learning how old Marvel and DC comics were colored would be a quick Google search. Turns out the methods used back then varied quite a bit, and it's actually a lot more interesting and not as straightforward as I thought it would be. I even found out there was a how to color comics the Marvel way. I never knew this book existed. Maybe down the line, I'll make a video trying out some of these techniques digitally. I'm especially interested in screen tone textures, but that's for another day. For the too long didn't read version, they used water-based dyes, also known as watercolors. Mainly Dr. Martens, and that is expensive. Thank goodness for ones and zeros. Watercolor is one of, if not the most popular effect digital artists try to emulate from traditional mediums. If you search watercolor Photoshop or watercolor brush Procreate or any other art software, you'll probably get hundreds of results. Luckily, I have my own. It's been a while since I used watercolors, and I wouldn't say I'm very good with them, but it's all about controlling the water to paint ratio, and to get solid flat colors, you just need to move the paint around before the water is completely absorbed so you don't get any dark borders anywhere. Since I'm doing this digitally, I have a lot more control and I don't have to worry about any dark edges. I also put a paper texture on top of everything else to make it look even more traditional. And unlike the Disney way, I embraced Zenitsu's orange fades. I still think they'd be problematic during the printing process, but maybe it's something they could work with. Maybe. I don't know. But as for my way of coloring, it depends. Honestly, it changes a lot, and I'm still trying to get into the groove of coloring. I spent so much time improving my drawing and my inking that I don't really consider coloring to be my strong suit. Actually, I've never felt like it's been my strong suit, ever. I have, though, always been drawn to cell shading since it's a simple but effective method to place shadow and light. And I've been really liking the airbrush / gradient effect along with the heavy inking, so that's pretty much what I did with Zenitsu. I don't really think it's that interesting, not like the others. If you zoom in, you can see that I'm carving out these lines in the colors to give it more of a sharp fade instead of a smooth one that you would get if you were to use, say, the airbrush tool. And when I am airbrushing, I got into this habit where I put down darker colors at the bottom for a soft shadow and a light color at the top to give soft lighting. It works, but I think I can do better, so I'm trying to be a bit more involved in their placement, like how I airbrushed the shadow in Zenitsu's left sleeve. I'll say my favorite part is definitely the sword and the lightning. I used the same trick I did with the triangles, so I only had to worry about the shape of the lightning bolts. One thing I constantly do, and this is more of an organization / convenience thing, is that I use a lot of clipping masks. I also have this habit of using too many colors to try and get a bit too creative. Like, example, the blue lightning at first. Sometimes you just gotta go with a simpler palette. When I first set out to make this video, I thought it would be a quick, here's what this popular character would look like in a different art style type of video and be done with it. But from reading How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way and watching videos, not just art videos, but that focus on the why of drawing and painting and not so much the how, and collecting artist books to get a feel for their drawing processes, as I was drawing, I couldn't help but stop and wonder the whys as well as the hows. How did they make this back then, not just how am I going to do it now? Why wouldn't this work? What were the limitations back then to make it not work? I guess I geeked out sharing more about the process of things instead of some step-by-step or look at this like people were probably expecting. The actual drawings were deceptively difficult too, especially the Disney one. In my mind, I'm thinking this is gonna be animated so I can't be too flashy, but Zenitsu is already flashy, so the animators would be in hell anyway. And with Marvel, I feel like the inking was going in so many different directions because I couldn't land on one specific inker because they were all so different. I did have the most fun with it though, mostly because I don't use my watercolor brushes often, so that was a good excuse to use them. As for my style, I'm still learning. It'll probably change in the next year. Or next week. I guess the takeaway from this video, if anyone is still watching, is if you're into art, if you're into comics, into animating, if you want to draw, or if you just like looking at it, study it. Learn the whys as well as the hows. You might appreciate the things you love even more. Collect art too if you have the space and the money for it, especially in this digital world we live in now. Prints, posters, actual comic books, DVDs if people even care about those anymore. You should. And if you're trying to learn to draw, Get that stuff too, but next time when you have the chance, maybe skip the how to draw whatever book and pick up an art of book or an artist book, because I think the best art books aren't actually the ones where you rely on steps to tell you what to do, but force you to find the how for yourself. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.